Welcome back to the show. Well, as the holidays come up, I know many of you start getting stressed out. I like to think I don't, but I'm certainly, we all go through a certain sense of anxiety, some worse than others. And my next guest is going to help us with some tips to help us get through that stressful time during the holidays. I'm joined by Emily Deacon. She is the Director of Professional Practice Allied Health at the Royal Ottawa Healthcare Group. How are you, Emily?
I'm very well, thank you, Derek.
Great to have you here. It's been a difficult almost 3 years now. I know we're concentrating specifically on the holidays, but you must have seen, over this 3-year period, so much more stress than we've ever seen probably in our lifetime, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I remember really early on we had a conversation. The World Health Organization put out a paper talking about what we can expect with a pandemic, especially if it's a world pandemic.
Right.
And they talked about anticipating a tsunami of mental health challenges. And unfortunately, they weren't wrong. We've certainly seen a lot more people needing help for the first time, relying on coping strategies that are maybe not the best, consuming more substance, that kind of thing. So we have seen challenges for sure.
Yeah, and the holidays have always been stressful for a lot of people. Doesn't necessarily have to be, but that's easy for me to certainly say. It's not necessarily easy to do. Let's start off with managing expectations. How do we go about doing that the right way?
Well, it's very challenging, especially because there's sort of this false reality of the perfect hallmark, holiday season and the perfect family and no stress. So really it's being realistic and thinking about having a plan and what can you expect, and also how has it gone in the past? Has this been a challenging time for your family over the years? And just really preparing for that and thinking about what can you do to make it a little easier? How can you sort of set some boundaries perhaps, or some limits, and just be realistic about it.
I'm glad you mentioned limits, and I'm not making a suggestion before anyone sends me a note of, sort of maybe you have a difficult family member and, they tend to be the source of stress, and I'm not suggesting you don't invite them, but maybe you shouldn't. You know what I'm saying? I think we feel this sense of guilt, and then we make ourselves miserable because we think it's something we have to do.
Absolutely. People who are challenging or people that stress you out, it's okay to say, I'm not going to see as much of them, or I'm going to see them sort of in a smaller dose, or I'll support them over the holidays in a different way. I think it really is being, taking care of yourself and being kind to yourself. And sometimes that means being careful with the challenging family dynamics that are ever present, but intensified in the holidays for sure. One
of the biggest stresses is financial, and I think we're going to see that this year more than we've ever seen before. How do we deal with that?
Well, another thing is really having a plan. So I think you're absolutely right. There's been a lot of coverage in the media recently about inflation, everything's getting more expensive, and some of the challenges. I think everyone is feeling it to greater or lesser degree. And this coming into the holiday season, we feel a lot of pressure to get your kids that new toy or get the gifts for everyone. So it's just, again, having a plan, trying to stick with it, and also getting help. If this is a source of stress for you, it can also be a source of stress for your relationships. It's really important to keep an eye on that and to reach out if you feel like you're falling behind or it's becoming unmanageable or you're losing sleep about your money. There are lots of ways to get support.
I touched on it with Amanda, who runs the original Navin Market. She owns her own spa as well, and self-care is a big thing. It's a treat. It's something we should treat ourselves to.
Absolutely. It's funny. Amanda definitely looked zen. She looked like she was having a great time. And I think it's extremely important to, make a plan for self-care. And it's really the basics. It's sleeping well. It's eating well. Trying not to overindulge in substances. It's getting outside. It's, getting into nature. We know that's good for your stress, good for your brain. Getting sunlight in your eyes to keep your mood up, because certainly people around this time of year can struggle even more. And so ways to combat that, spending time outside and doing meaningful things as well. So part of self-care is your meaningful role. That might be volunteering, supporting a loved one, doing something that sort of helps to make you feel better. Yeah,
it's kind of something my wife and I decided on a few years ago, is embracing the winter. I mean, we live in a cold climate for at least 6 months out of the year where it's quite cold, right? And if we keep cocooning ourselves all the time, which brings me to the next topic, right? Which is we find ourselves more isolated than ever before. We've just, as I said, gone through a pandemic, and that loneliness can really turn into some serious mental health issues. How do we combat loneliness?
Absolutely. So I think, it really is having those support systems in place, whether that has to be virtual, if our numbers might go up again, or whatever it is. It really is reaching out for those connections. They talk about, it's often been said that the opposite of addiction is connection. So, really reaching out to people, and loneliness can be felt especially acutely this time of year. You might miss loved ones. You might, have to not gather in person. So it can be a real challenge.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you mentioned virtual. I know it's very effective as well, but I just find, social media, for instance, we think that this is connecting us, and it can in some ways, but it's also disconnecting us as well in some ways, right, Emily?
Absolutely. They've done lots of studies about the more time you spend sort of swiping on Facebook, the worse you sort of feel about yourself. So that's that hallmark sort of thing again. The social media is everyone's best foot forward, but so maybe we have to go to your other suggestion where you connect outside instead, so you can kind of enjoy some winter activities together and do it safely.
Well, and I think we're so lucky here in this area as well, that we have so many things to offer, right? You don't necessarily have to take up downhill skiing because it's not affordable for everybody, but you can take up maybe cross-country skiing, maybe skating, maybe you rent skates to start and introduce yourself to something like that. We've run out of time, but overindulgence is another thing. You did touch on it. I want to mention to everybody at home that that's also a danger. We'll be back with more Daytime right after this.